Anchor, how we doing? Pastor Brian here with my dear, amazing friend. What's your name again?
My name's Susan. I'm the pastor of Spiritual Formation.
That's right.
So nice to see you.
If you don't know Susan, you should. She is stinking amazing.
I'm stinking.
Stinking. No, wait for it. It follows. Stinking amazing, not just stinking. All right.
All right.
All right. True story. Moment of kind of transparency with all of us watching. So I skateboard. You know that. And
I do.
Apparently, when I skateboard, I sweat a lot in my feet. So my wife, my wife is like, Brian, you need to buy new shoes. So my secret mission is like, if I can just make my shoes stink whenever I want new shoes, she'll let me buy them. So anyways, that's a free pro tip for you, you know.
That's awesome.
That's all, just, you know, make your shoes really smelly beyond what Dr. Scholl's and, you know, whatever can help you with, and then you'll be able to get new shoes. So,
I feel like I know you so much better now.
well, that was my hope.
Yeah,
That was
thank
my
you.
hope.
Thank you.
And to resource all of us with some ways to get new.
That's awesome.
Any pro tips? You got any pro tips for us? I mean, I
Pro
shared.
tips for you as a skater?
No. For
Yeah,
all of us.
I got tons. I've been waiting for you to ask.
Okay, all right. Give me one.
No, please, no. But I do want to get rollerblades, just FYI.
All right.
No, I really do.
All right.
I'm worried about my arms and my legs and my head, but other than that, I'm
Yeah,
okay.
you can pad up.
Yeah.
So, you know, I tell you what. Let us know through social media one way or another if you want to see Susan start rollerblading. Like maybe we can even get it in the online here. So let us know though. And if we hear enough from you, I'm sure we could expedite that.
You can contribute to my rollerblade fund.
We could get Susan. We could get you all padded up in rollerblades on an online.
I would do
gallery.
that. I would.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
people are wanting it now. People
All right.
are wanting it. But speaking of things that people are wanting, people are
Yes.
wanting to know, I think, about what's happening in the Anchor community. Well, let me tell you guys,
Absolutely.
there's a lot. Okay. And full stop. there's a lot. So
Yeah.
what are some things that are happening?
I'm thinking about Ash Wednesday.
Okay, you're thinking about it.
It's our first
Yeah.
Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday is
celebration.
what day of the week is Ash Wednesday on?
I can't remember. Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. So Wednesday, March 2nd,
Yep, March
is going
2nd.
to be our first kind of Ash Wednesday celebration at Anchor.
So Ash Wednesday is the beginning of Lent, and Lent is this journey towards Easter of reflection, of kind of heart preparation for the victory of Easter. And in my own reflection, like Easter loses kind of like this felt sense of meaning if it doesn't have a long runway of heart preparation. So I'm excited for us to be kind of start kicking everybody off on Ash Wednesday as we kind of reflect on our mortality and kind of like God's grace to us and our need for this grace here at Anchor. And there's going to be more information about how you can come and experience it. There'll be stuff before people go away for their workday and after people return for their workday. And so there'll be kind of different ways you can come in different points to kind of have an Ash Wednesday experience, get a Lent devotional written from the Anchor staff members, and it should be a really powerful kickoff to a powerful season.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that we're
doing
diving into that this year.
We're doing it.
Yeah,
We're
it'll
doing
be
it.
really great. Some stuff coming up for the guys.
Yep. So on February 27th at 7 p.m. at Camp Calvos in downtown Tacoma, guys are having a kind of a men's brewery meetup. Yeah, hangout. Super informal. So it's like if you are watching this, you happen to be a guy who lives in Tacoma or the surrounding area, just come or bring somebody with you or show up by yourself. And it's this informal hangout, just, you know, have a drink, don't have a drink, have a piece of pizza, whatever, just hang out and get to know other people in the Anchor community. It should be a rich time.
I think if you're a guy, you should totally go, even if you don't know anybody.
You sold me.
Just sign
You sold
up.
me. I'm going to
You're
go.
going.
I'm going to
All
go.
right.
You sold me.
Yeah.
So I'll see you there. We'll see you there.
Yeah.
And it should be good.
Women, we are not thinking about you. There's the If Gathering is coming. I'm
happening.
so excited for the If Gathering, March 25th and 26th. Friday evening and all day Saturday. We're going to gather with women from all around the South Sound. We're going to hear world-class speakers. We're going to worship together.
Yeah.
We're going to eat and drink and have fun and get to know each other. It's going to be such a meaningful time. It's our second time around to host an If Gathering. So we're really, really excited about that. You can register online today.
Registrations are already coming in, so
Yep.
you want to make sure, get your spot, save your spot, come with some friends, this is going to be a rich time of community and of learning, both those things.
That's right. Yep.
Next up, we have kind of some worship, but just looking ahead a little bit, our teaching today is going to be coming from Bobby Arkills, one of the elders at Anchor. Great teacher as he continues our 1 Peter teaching series.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
But right now is worship. So do what you need to do to ready your heart. Take a deep breath. Focus on the promises of God. Put your phone aside. Do what you need to do. And worship.
You can have my cares, you can have this world's distractions. You can have my eyes, you can have my full attention. I just want you. You can have my heart, you can have my full devotion. You can have my song, you can have my endless worship. I just want you. I just want Jesus, Jesus. How could I ever thank you? Jesus, my freedom. How could I keep from praising? You've been so good to me. You've been so good to me. Yeah, yeah. So good. You loved me first, you were in my darkest moments. Even in my worst, you were there with arms wide open. So I love you, Lord, I love you. Jesus, Jesus, how could I ever thank you? Jesus, my freedom, how could I keep from praising? You've been so good to me. You've been so good to me. Jesus, Jesus, how could I ever thank you? Jesus, my freedom, how could I keep from praising? You've been so good to me. You've been so good to me. Yes, you've been good to me. You've been good to me. So good to me. Every good and perfect gift, every moment, every breath, it comes from you, God. It's all for you, God. Every step your spirit leads, your love's inviting me. You have my yes, God. My answer's yes, God. Every good and perfect gift, every moment, every breath, it comes from you, God. It's all for you, God. Every step your spirit leads, your love's inviting me. You have my yes, God. My answer's yes, God. Every good and perfect gift, every moment, every breath, it comes from you, God. It's all for you, God. Every step your spirit leads, your love's inviting me. You have my yes, God. My answer's yes. Jesus, Jesus, how could I ever thank you? Jesus, my freedom, how could I keep from praising? You've been so good.
Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how long I scale valleys if you graced the other side. And oh, how long have I chased rivers from lowly seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. And I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, 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 how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's past. And oh, how fast would you come running if just a shadow me through the night, and trace my steps through all my failures, and walk me out the other side. Who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary, but for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, 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 wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I sing through the shadows my song of ascent. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I sing through the shadows my song of ascent, my song of ascent. Oh, oh, my song of ascent. Oh, from the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace. a mighty river flowing upward from a deep but empty grave. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heartache all the same.
Don't you just love the words of that song?
Yeah.
I love that we have a God who's with us if we're in the valleys or in the highlands, both. Like, doesn't matter where we are, He's here with us. He sees us and He knows us. Yeah, we're so glad that you're here with us, that we get to be together with you in this online gathering today. We hope that it's a time that you find really meaningful. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to engage with you. We have a digital connection card in the platform where you're viewing that you can ask questions. You can ask for prayer. We love to pray for those prayer requests that you send in. We consider it a great privilege. If you want to get connected, that's another thing you can do through that digital connection card. We hope you'll do that.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about every week online at Lincoln and at Central is the value of being generous and partnering with God to extend the mission of God through the local church. And I can tell you as an insider, like, it's such a treat to hear the stories and to see the lives change because of your generosity and your faithfulness to offer your tithes and your gifts to the mission of God expressed in the local church. One thing that's on my mind, just even right now, is thinking about some of the emails we've gotten from people that have taken advantage of the opportunity that we've provided, really you've provided through your giving, to resource people with like the opportunity for like more mental health, to meet with a counselor, to meet with a therapist. You might not know about this, but we've done this. We've said, hey, whether you're part of Anchor or not, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, but we'll offer you 3 counseling sessions because we care about you. We know what's happening with this nation, with mental health crises, people at different turning points. And so we just extended that. We've had lots of people say, hey, we would love that. And to get emails back like you've gotten, like I've gotten, saying, hey, thank you so much. Your generosity, like what Anchor providing this has helped me get to another level of freedom, into a deeper level of relationship with Jesus. Like, there is nothing like that, right? There's nothing like that. So I just want you to know, because I'm excited about like being a part of a church that is like doing things like that, that's helping people get farther in the relationship with God and farther in their own self-awareness, farther in their own development, farther in their sense of freedom that the Spirit brings. And I want you to be excited about it too, because it's your generosity that's done that. It's your giving that's enabled people to have that gift of 3 free counseling sessions. And honestly, there is so much more that we could share, thousands of stories about a whole bunch of different things that is really connected to the financial generosity of people here in the Anchor community, whether Central or Lincoln. But that's just one thing on my mind right now. There's lots of different ways to give. It's super simple. You can give online, just visiting the website. You can mail in a check. You might even think of other creative ways you could do it. You could drop it off at the Central location during the week, whatever. But just consider continuing or starting a journey of financial generosity and partnering with God through giving to the local church. It is a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, we're so grateful for you.
Yeah,
we have Ash Wednesday coming.
Yep.
I'm really excited. This will be our first time to have an Ash Wednesday gathering before work in the morning, or as you come home from work in the later part of the afternoon, early evening. A really meaningful time where we reflect on our brokenness as humans as we head into the Lenten season and look toward Easter and Jesus' death on the cross on our behalf. So I'm really excited about that. It'll be on Wednesday, March 2nd. And so we hope that you'll mark that on your calendar and plan to be part of that with us.
Stay tuned for more information on that, because There'll be times like even before work and after work, you may have said this already,
Yeah.
where you can have that experience. Hey, next up is one of the elders at Anchor, Bobby Arkills. He's continuing our teaching series on 1 Peter called Exiles. It's going to be great. So grab that journal, grab a pencil or pen, grab your notes app, your coffee, whatever you need, and be present for this teaching.
Thanks for joining us here at Anchor. We are so glad that you're a part of this. My name is Bobby Arkills. I've called this home for the last 4 years, and I'm part of the ministry board. And we are in week 8 of our series going through 1 Peter, and we've called it Exiles. With the idea being is Jesus followers, we are exiles. This isn't our home. This is not our normal place. So what does it mean to follow Jesus as exiles in a foreign land, but to live out our faith in such a way that it's attraction to people? They want to know, who is Jesus and what's the difference in your life? Now, I know it was all of a week ago, but the Super Bowl took place, and I'm guessing you, like me, watched these games all throughout the playoffs, just really tight games, never a blowout. And I watch these games and I realize how nervous I'm getting. And the fact is, I'm not in that pressure situation. I'm sitting on my couch. I have a bowl of popcorn, but there's something inside of me with the pressure that makes me nervous when I watch that quarterback and the receiver. And I think, how would I act in that moment? And then I put myself in their mind and think 70,000 fans, people screaming. You have very large and very fast men trying to knock you down. And you have 1.2 seconds to deliver the perfect pass. And then you hear the interviews after the game. And they're not so much caught up right in the moment and feeling the pressure, but really it's a sense of muscle memory. They have done this so much and practiced so often that it just comes naturally to them. As we've looked at 1 Peter, we've talked about some different themes. There's been a theme of joy. There's been a theme of love and a theme of suffering. And it feels like as we get into 1 Peter chapter 4 today, the first 11 verses, we're getting to a place where Peter is saying this. Okay, we've talked about the themes. Now here's some very practical ways that you can live this out. Some very easy ways that you can live out what it means to be a Jesus follower in a broken world. And for me, that's an encouragement, because when I think about Peter, we think about the author of this book. We look back to the Peter of old. The old Peter was a fisherman, one of Jesus' first disciples. We know he was brash. He was outgoing. Peter was one of those people that typically spoke first and then thought second. Maybe you've been with those people. You have friends. Maybe you are that person. But he would usually jump into the adventure first, and then he would think, what does this actually mean? But yet this is a transformed Peter that is writing to us. He's different because Jesus Christ has been at work in his life. And so as we open up right here in 1 Peter chapter 4, the first practical way that Peter challenges us to be different as exiles in a broken world is that we're to live for the will of God. It says this in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you've spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They think it strange that you do not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. What's interesting is that Peter starts this off, he says, therefore, which takes us back to chapter 3. Chapter 3 finishes and says, the ultimate example of suffering was Jesus Christ, who had every right to turn away from suffering, being God's only Son, God in the flesh. And yet he leaned into that. And so Peter says this, therefore, arm yourselves with the same attitude. And when we read the book of 1 Peter, which again is a letter to this church, these are exiles in today what would be called modern day Turkey. It was Asia Minor. These were Jews and Gentiles. But a letter was meant to be read in one sitting. So you wouldn't read one chapter and then step away typically, and then come back to the second part and step away. It was one time. So you would read this and understand that there was a little bit of a theme of being on watch, of being alert. He says, arm yourselves, in the sense that there's a battle going on. He even says in chapter 5 that you should make sure to watch out because there's an enemy that is prowling around. And when we think about the first step of being exiles and living out who Jesus is in a broken world, living for the will of God is to understand that there's a spiritual battle that is happening. There are forces at work against us, both from the outside, the spiritual world, but also our own flesh that are making it very difficult for us to follow the will of God. In fact, it's interesting that Peter references that, remember your friends that used to go with you. And he has this amazing list of debauchery, orgies, idolatry, everything. It says that they're amazed, that makes no sense, when you don't jump into that same flood of dissipation. I don't know what that means, but I know it's not good. That you don't jump into that. Not only do they not understand, doesn't make sense, but it says they heap abuse upon you. When we think about turning away from the old life, we think about the decisions that we used to make before we surrendered our life to Jesus. Or maybe if you're watching Anchor today and you say, well, decisions that I make today, I'm thinking about the consequences, and they're not great consequences. Peter was saying, look back at your old life and understand that when you turn away from that and decide to follow the will of God, not only will they not make sense to others, but suffering is a part of that equation. Suffering is always part of the equation of following Jesus. I remember when I was a new Christian and I came across this verse, and there were two parts of the verse. And typically I'd hear the first part, but never the second part. And the first part is that I want to share in the power of his resurrection. I want that power that God offers, and he showed in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. But then the second part is, but also to share in the fellowship of his sufferings. Is that part of following Jesus is to understand that suffering is a given. But when we understand that suffering is a given in pursuing the will of God, and we'll also realize that we would much rather choose following God's will than the short-term satisfaction of all these things and the things that you and I have left behind in our old life. But sometimes we get to the place we wonder, okay, what is God's will? I really would like it laid out on a piece of paper for me, that I could go down the list and say, this is God's will, this is the timing, this is exactly where I go, what I say, and then I'm affirmed in that. But in looking for that, you can look all throughout the Bible, and you won't find that list in here. However, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18 says this, rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. The key of living for the will of God is to lean into the Father. It's continually to ask him, God, what should I do in praying continually? Where do you want me to go? Is this the right decision for me? And it's to lean away from areas where you know short-term satisfaction is there, but the long-term impact you begin to understand because God's will becomes forefront in your life. You begin to see down the road that that's not going to work out well for me. So for Peter, he says the first step is to ask yourself, what are you leaving behind? And maybe that's a question today you can think about. If you're a Christ follower, what are the areas that you left behind that those watching you would say there's something different about him, something different about her, because you're deciding to lean into God's will. You're rejoicing always, you're praying continually, and you're giving thanks in all circumstances. When you do that, you'll be very different than the world around you. So Peter says not only should we live for the will of God, but also we should live with love and hospitality. He goes on to say this in verse 7, the end of all things is near. Therefore, be clear-minded and self-controlled so that you can pray. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. So we read this, and I think sometimes in our modern day understanding of the Bible, we can say that is very dated. The idea of the end of all things is near. You know, the picture that comes to mind when I was growing up is to see people, maybe you'd see it today, that would be on the side of the corner of the street and say, they have a sign, the end of all things is near. And sometimes we immediately just, we dismiss those people. Well, there's something that's not right there. But Peter is reminding us that we don't know the actual timeline, the date, the actual circumstances, but we do know that Jesus promises he is coming back. And I think Peter leads with this by saying, if we understand that Jesus' return is imminent, we know he will come back for us, then every area of our life should be affected. And then he goes on to establish another theme that you find here. And it says this, above all, love each other deeply. What's interesting is that if you go back a couple chapters, in the first teaching we had, chapter 1, verse 22, he also says, love the brothers deeply. He's challenging us that above everything else, no matter how you act, how you talk, what you think, you should love others. That should be the number one trait that stands out as an exile of Jesus, is how you love others deeply. But he goes on to say, not only love others deeply, but he says, love covers over a multitude of sins. I think it's important to remember the author. So we talked about that Peter now is a transformed Peter. He's a Peter that after Jesus rose from the dead, and Peter had the opportunity to be one of the first that would speak the good news to crowds, was an amazing communicator. This fisherman who, filled by the Spirit, spoke God's truth. But let's go back a little bit, because this is the same Peter that when Jesus Christ was being led to the cross, Peter was asked 3 times, do you know this Jesus? No, I don't. Weren't you with that Galilean? No, not me. But you know Jesus? No. He denied him 3 times. Then it says in John chapter 21 that when Jesus had rose from the dead, he appeared to the disciples. The disciples were doing what they loved to do. They were out fishing. And it says they looked on the shore and they recognized it was Jesus. Peter, being Peter, jumped out of the boat with his gown on, swam to the shore, and they sat down. And they had this interaction where Jesus came to Peter and Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, Lord, you know I do. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Lord, you know I do. Feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? And it says in John that Peter was hurt. Why was he hurt? He was hurt because 3 times Jesus came to him and says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? 3 times Peter denied Jesus. I think for Peter, as he wrote this to the church there in modern day Asia Minor, Turkey, and he's writing us today, is that Peter was very, very aware and understood what it meant to love deeply because Jesus Christ forgave him again and again and again. And sometimes the areas of our deepest hurt are the places where God uses that to become the transformation for us to love others. If you've been to Anchor for a little while and had heard a little bit of my story when I've shared before, you know that I have a difficult relationship with my dad. We never been really very close. It's better now than it was as a teenager, but there were just enough under the bridge of my father not encouraging and really telling me that I was kind of I guess a disappointment to him in a lot of different areas. Well, my dad has a very serious form of cancer right now. And I'm really struggling right now because as much as I love my father, may not have liked the way he dealt with me growing up, but I know that right now what my dad needs more from me than ever is to love him deeply. Now, I know this is written especially to those believers saying, Jews and Gentiles, love each other. The outside world should see the difference by how you love each other. But I think that also overflows as we forgive others. Who are other people that we need to love outside the body of Christ? Our neighbors, other family members, people we work with. And what does that look like? For Peter, this hit home because the love deeply, he knew what that was like to betray someone that you loved and then to be radically forgiven 3 times. So I don't think that it's any kind of a mistake that in chapter 1 and again now in chapter 4, he says you must love deeply. Above everything else, love forgives a multitude of sins. Sometimes that love is for someone else. And what will that look like today for us to love deeply? Sometimes that love and that forgiveness is love and forgiveness we need to extend to ourselves. Maybe it's decisions that you and I have made where it's too easy to beat ourselves up and we think we have to meet a certain standard or that God couldn't possibly love us. But the truth that we want you to know at Anchor is there's a God that pursues you every day. And his love is so great that he would come alongside and give his word to say, you can love others deeply when my love is filling you up, when you understand how much I love you. One of the ways that we live this out is we live with love, deep love, but also a hospitality. He says here, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. I think it's interesting that he has that qualifier, without grumbling. Usually that means somebody was grumbling in this context, and therefore Peter is writing to address that specific issue. I mean, it's like when you have kids, and our daughters are all grown out of the house, but when we would say take out the garbage, there was usually a qualifier. Please take out the garbage and don't complain, because they were complaining about it. And we wanted to say there's a job and there's an attitude to go with it. In the same way, Peter says one way that you can show as exiles that the love of Jesus is amazing to a broken world is offer hospitality. And I think it's great that in Anchor, presence, purpose, hope, and hospitality is one of our core values. So think about today. What does that look like for you today? Is there an opportunity for you to offer hospitality without grumbling, with a joyful heart? Maybe it's to invite somebody to your house for lunch, somebody who's brand new if you're at Anchor, or somebody that you're going to come across today as you watch this. Is there a way that you can open up your home and extend not just your home, but other resources that you can offer for hospitality? Are there ways that you could serve the homeless in our community? Ways that you can offer different resources that God has been giving you to be able to love others and to show that hospitality was not only a way that Jesus came to us and opened up the house for us, but also he calls us to be hospitable to others. So Peter says, live for the will of God. He says to live with love and hospitality. And then finally, he challenges us, if we're going to be exiles in a broken world, we must live to serve. It says, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. The great news, he says each one should use that gift. That means every single one of you and me, we have a gift that God has given us. And we have an opportunity to steward that gift, to take care of it, to use it for God's glory. I can remember a really difficult time about 10 years ago. I work for an organization called Youth for Christ. And in my role as the executive director, there is a lot of responsibility that falls upon me as far as the fundraising. And I remember coming to a very difficult time. I think it was when perhaps the economy was having some tough situations. And I remember thinking we need $40,000 by the end of next week to make payroll. And going to my finance director and saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know who I can lean on as far as board members. Do we educate our staff better? Should we start selling things, cutting back? And Linda, who is an amazing godly woman, she simply said to me, Bobby, go look at when the authorities asked Peter if Jesus was going to pay the temple tax and just do the same thing. I said, okay. So I went back to Matthew 17 and read that. Basically, the authorities came and said, does Jesus pay the tax? Peter went to Jesus and said, what do we do? And Jesus says, I want you to go cast a line. And when you bring the fish up, you'll find that in the mouth of the fish will be exactly what is needed for the temple tax. Well, that really didn't help me much. So I went back to Linda and I said, okay, this feels like it's a scavenger hunt. He went out and he went to the waterfront. Is that where I'm supposed to go? Waterfront? Next clue at the waterfront. She said, no. What did Peter do? I said, he went fishing. She said, what was Peter best at? Well, outside of being loud and boisterous, he was a fisherman. He was gifted at that. And she said, Bobby, I want you to go do what you do best with what God has given you. And that spoke volumes to me at the time, because it didn't release me from saying, what else can I do? But it said, lean into the ways that God has gifted me, do it with all of my strength and energy, and lean into God and say, am I going down the right road, Father? Every single one of us has a gift to give. In fact, it says in Romans chapter 12, verse 6, it says, we have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it's serving, let him serve. If it's teaching, let him teach. If it's encouraging, let him encourage. If it's contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it's leadership, let him govern diligently. If it's showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. Again, back to 1 Peter. Peter says, when you do it the strength that God provides. God says you have a gift, and I'm going to give you opportunities, but when you dive into it, I want you to give it all that you can. because we're stewards of that gift. God has given it to us. But that gift has been given to us not only to praise God and point glory to Him, but it's also been given to us to bring joy to us in the midst of it. I think sometimes when we think about having those gifts, one of the first questions we have, or the first way we deny it, is we say, I don't think I have anything specific. I'm not sure what I'm good at. So with that said, I'm just not going to do anything. And I think there are three ways that we can begin to discover what those giftings are, the ways that God has uniquely wired us to be able not only to serve those around us, but ultimately to point to Him and to give Him glory and to make Him attractive to others. I think number one is we can ask. That means going to God and simply praying, God, I'm not sure where I'm gifted, but I believe that in some way, through your word, through your Spirit in my heart, through others, you can speak to me. Is to ask God and then to ask others. That's another way of the first way is to ask others. Ask other Christians that you respect and say, you see me. What are some of the gifts that you think God has given me to serve others? Number two is this, is to ask yourself, where does my heart break? Bob Pierce, who was the founder of World Vision, on the very first trip he made to Vietnam before he even founded World Vision, had this quote that has been often shared, and it says this, let my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God. I remember when I started with Youth for Christ, and I went to a high school, and I wasn't sure where to start with relationships with kids, and do I begin with a weekly large group gathering? And I remember my supervisor said, I want you to do this first. I want you to park outside that school, and I want you to pray for that school and watch those kids, their faces coming out. And I want you to do that until God breaks your heart for those kids. And I remember doing that over and over and over and over until I realized I wasn't just seeing faces, but I was seeing eternal souls, these kids who seemed like they were doing so well, but you could tell that underneath that, there was hurt, there was dissatisfaction, there was pain. It's to ask God, where does my heart break? Maybe your heart breaks for young people. Maybe your heart breaks for prayer, the power of prayer, and you could utilize that gift right here at Anchor. Maybe your heart breaks for people in the community, acts of injustice. But when you ask that question, God, break my heart for the things that break yours, you will find that God can then begin to direct you in ways to use your gifts. Then number three is simply to look for where He's at work. When I first started with Youth for Christ, I did a Bible study called Experiencing God. And that was the basic premise. It wasn't to go out and create your own ministry. It was simply to look, where is God at work, and then join with Him. And you may find that you jump in, say here at Anchor, God's at work in the prayer ministry. I'm going to dive in there. And you may say, this is it. Or after a few weeks, this isn't it. Let me try something else. So it could be a trial and error. But the great news is God has gifted you in some way. How can you lean into that? Because when you lean into that, not only will God get the glory, people will see the difference of the exile, but also you'll find the greatest and deepest joy in your life. So think about on-ramps right here at Anchor. Are there serve teams? There's ways to serve, whether it's in the kids ministry, in the teen ministry. Are there ways you can serve on the prayer team, in communion, helping around the grounds? Whatever that looks like, look at different ways. Put your name on that card and say, I'd like to find out ways to serve, to see where God has gifted me. So again, a reminder, Peter says, with the attitude, understanding that suffering is a given, the way that we practice it so that people see that exiles like us are different. And what we have, they long for in a relationship with Jesus Christ, is to live for the glory of God and His will. It's to live with deep love and hospitality and to live to serve. And the great news is this, is that these example of the will of God, of love, of serving, these were all shown to us in the person of Jesus Christ. That the God of the universe so loves you right now that He would send His only Son to live on this earth, to be the example of suffering, to go willingly to the cross so that the bridge between us and God could be bridged, and then to be raised from the dead, to have the power to conquer sin. And that power is the power that God says, I want to fill you with. He wants to fill me with. And all we simply need to do is say, God, I surrender my life to you. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I know that the way I've been living isn't working out, that I'm not finding the deep sense of satisfaction and joy in these areas that I'm dabbling in. But what I hear is enough for me to dip my toes in the water and say, have my life. Show me the direction you want me to go. And when you do that, God promises to meet you. He promises to change you from the inside out, bit by bit by bit, so that the transformation we talk about here in the way that you show yourself to the world becomes more and more convincing, more and more appealing, because Jesus is overflowing out of you.
Now comes a time where we end our gathering the way that we always do, with a commissioning prayer. And here's our heart behind why we do a commissioning prayer. Just as we have gathered together intentionally, even digitally, we believe that we should be sent out intentionally as well as we go back into our homes, our neighborhoods, and the city as a whole. So as we say this prayer together, you can extend your hands forward if you want as a way of receiving these words upon you. We look to you, God. Transform us by your love. Invite us to your presence. Make us people of hope in our city. Send us out as witnesses of all we have seen and heard. Rebuild our lives as wholly different people. In a world of injustice, let every aspect of our lives show that we live for you. We let go of all anxiety and enter the rest of your loving care. God the Creator, call us to the work of the kingdom. God the Redeemer, keep us from stumbling. God the Sustainer, transform and inspire us as we live as your witnesses. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.